Kirby Air Ride is a game hated by critics, loved by fans, and almost forgotten by time. Released on July 11th, 2003, Kirby Air Ride is the 25th best-selling GameCube game of all time with a staggering 1.35 million units sold, and wait, that's actually not a lot of units at all. Back then, the video game industry was much smaller, and the GameCube itself was a pretty poorly selling console, at least compared to what would come before and what came after. In total, the GameCube was about 1/5 as popular as the Wii, finishing its run at 21.74 million units sold. Because the Nintendo Wii, which is also a functional GameCube, sold over 100 million units, many GameCube games were given a second lease on life and became far more popular after the GameCube had ceased production. This has resulted in an interesting phenomenon where, despite being relatively unpopular, GameCube games have now held on or even increased in value because so few of them were ever made to begin with compared to the many people that would later own a Wii and want to play them. Kirby Air Ride is of course one of these games, with its value having increased a tad bit over time. But by looking at the reviews, you might be a little bit confused why people would care so much about the game. 5.2 out of 10 on IGN, 61% on Metacritic. None of this is very entertaining at all. The game offers some of the most slender, inconsequential, and ultimately boring distractions to be found on the GameCube. Ultimately, this is a game for the youngest of GameCube players, and difficult to recommend to anyone who takes their racing seriously. Don't pick this one up unless you're really hard up for a multiplayer game, or until it drops to $19.99. Guess we might have to wait another 20 years for that. Fortunately, explaining why the game is so hated by critics isn't difficult in the slightest. Upon booting up the game, the very first mode that you'll be introduced to is the titular Air Ride mode. And it kind of sucks, to be honest. Only 9 different maps exist in this mode, one of which has to be unlocked first. Don't worry, it's not all that exciting. And the game is committed to leading with its worst foot forward, giving you access to only 1 star at the beginning. So let's load up a match with the default settings and... oh, sorry, it seems my controller died. Well, I'll look around for some batteries. I think I had some around here somewhere. Nope, can't really find them. Popcorn down here. Oh, I won. I just won. Okay, I think you saw a little bit of the issue there. It's not a very hard game, and most of the levels don't have any way for you to lose a significant amount of time. You can put down your controller and ride through the whole thing. And because the rubber banding and draft mechanics are so strong by default, I actually tried to race on Fantasy Meadows again using the exact same rules, this time using my controller, and I only was able to shave off 2 seconds on one of the laps and 1 second on another one. The first lap was actually about as fast, if not slower, than my other laps when I wasn't playing the game. Well, there certainly are more skill-intensive carts that you can unlock, and every track is going to be harder than Fantasy Meadows. Wait, did I just call it a cart? They're stars. This game has a real problem with the rubber banding, otherwise known as speed help. The default setting is weak speed help, and you can see that it does actually help you if you're not playing the game at all. But it seems like higher level CPUs are affected by this more. I tried racing a few times in Machine Passage against level 9 CPUs and they were crushing me with weak speed help, but when I turned the speed help off, suddenly I was in front of them for the entire race, even though when the speed help was on weak, they were in front of me for the entire race. And so it wouldn't surprise me if people found this rule to be unintuitive at best. It's supposed to be a rubber banding mechanic, but it seems to benefit the computers far more than it does the players. I even caught one section where a computer rushed past me on a railway at hysterically high speeds. You can catch drafts on railways, but this just looks absurd, and I'm not sure who he was drafting. Obviously, Air Ride is far from one of the worst offenders when it comes to rubber banding and racing games, but sometimes it's just silly. Like, there is a stronger option available that I didn't select. How did he go that fast? You'd think he was on the Rocket Star with a giant boost, but no, it's the Wing Star. Speaking of charge and boost, there is only one button outside the joystick that actually does anything that affects your racing, and that is the A button, which brakes and charges, and when you release the button, you will boost depending on how long you've braked for. There are 3 stars in the game which use this mechanic differently, one of which uses it to drift and will only charge up quickly during a drift, and 2 of them which use the charge as their fuel, so to speak, so they won't move at all until you've charged. I suppose it's also worth mentioning that some stars have different turning mechanics, which are usually affected or interact with this in an interesting way. There is really good diversity within the roster. And you can wiggle the joystick to spin, which affects the way you bounce on walls and bounce through players, and it can deal some damage, but not usually very much. The main problems are that these air ride maps never get too challenging, and they have limited replayability since, unlike in a game like Mario Kart where you have a lot of items, or a game like F-Zero where there's a ton to optimize, this game only provides a little bit of variety using the random power-ups that are often not very significant to this mode. And while the maps are all interesting to some degree and have some level of optimization, the shortcuts and alternate routes often fail to be meaningful, especially because there's nothing to do except go faster. This line was made specifically in reference to the lack of a mechanic like Mario Kart's coins or F-Zero's HP/boost meter. You can enable HP bars in this mode, but you're very unlikely to die. In fact, it's incredibly difficult to unless someone is playing as Meta Knight or King Dedede, both of which will always have power-ups that cause them to attack. And their attacking is totally automatic, by the way, though some of the power-ups will only be used when you actually hit the brake or charge button. I wish I could give this section of the game more praise, but I actually feel like this is where the critics were most clued into the game. The air ride section is not particularly fun, not particularly engaging, and not particularly replayable. Each mode does come with a large grid of challenges that do help you unlock all of the collectibles, and some of which that are just achievements which don't unlock anything. And trying to complete all the achievements is where the air ride mode is at its best, but unfortunately its best is just not very good. But before we move on to the next section, let's talk about that last unlockable stage, the Nebula Belt. In true Kirby fashion, the final stage takes place in outer space. But this is far from a climactic finishing act. No, it's a very, very simple stage that is admittedly beautiful, though you could say that about this entire game, I feel. The only special aspect about it is that it's got quite a few of these random Kirby power-up panels, which don't feel very special in the slightest. In fact, I'm not even sure if this stage was built around the idea that it would be special in any way. It just has more of these than any other. And so with most of my thoughts about the air ride section wrapped up neatly, let's talk about something a little bit cooler. Top Ride. Top Ride is probably the most underrated part of this game, both by the community and by the critics. It's a much faster-paced, miniaturized version of Air Ride where you still only have the one button and joystick controls, but the maps are far more interactable and items will appear everywhere, which are much more significant than the power-ups that exist in the Air Ride section. And because the maps are so small, other players are always posing a danger to you, even if they're a lap behind or a lap ahead. I feel as though this is the mode that most players have probably written off, mostly based on the fact that it calls itself a minigame, and it is really a mini game. It's a miniaturized version of the game, but it's also so much more. The grass stage has grape bombs, which can fall onto the stage if you hit the walls. The sand stage has so much going on with the Sarlacc pit that will eat and spit out players, sometimes giving them a boost and sometimes sending them back. It has 2 collapsing pathways, and it has a big rock golem that can fall on players and disrupt them. All of this packed into the tiniest little stage. Where was this creativity when they were designing some of the air ride levels? In fact, every one of the Top Ride stages, is an absolute banger, and so I feel like we should probably just explore why they're all so cool. The light stage will occasionally unlock light up passageways that can act as huge shortcuts, allowing for massive comebacks. The sky stage has a blue button that you can jump over in order to make the stage start moving faster, and this triple jump boost that is just so satisfying to pull off. And what is that? A hidden Triforce, perhaps? It's actually only a Triforce in the menu screenshot. They changed it to be just a triangle on the actual stage, but still, cool touch. The fire stage has these volcanoes that you can run into to cause them to erupt, and they have jet streams that will propel you in one direction or over this little gap, and an oil slick. Oh my god. The water stage is perhaps the least intrusive mechanically, but still has quite a bit going on. 2 streams caused by waterfalls will push the players when they cross over them, and if you touch the waterfall, you'll get shaken up before being spit out. The bottom of the stage will also periodically flood, causing a little disturbance if you happen to be driving over it at that time. And I can't help but feel like this Easter Island guy is supposed to do something. He really looks like he should, but upon investigation, it says it's just supposed to be a reference to the Kabu enemy and from the TV show Kirby Right Back at You. But you can't tell me he's not cut content. He totally looks like he should do something. And the metal stage, don't even get me started. It comes to life right as you're going through that first lap. You can turn on and off 3 different buttons that will affect the fans, which affect the wind speeds, and oh my gosh, it's so cool. You get to bust through these little walls, and this spinning gear allows you to hold a charge while taking the turn really tight. It's just awesome. And Top Ride manages to accomplish being the coolest thing ever, effectively with 1 star and 1 character. You can choose between the free star or the steer star, but really all it affects is your controls. One uses tank controls, the other uses left-right controls. I don't know, I like the steer star. I don't vibe with tank controls. Another thing that Top Ride gets right is that spinning is actually very relevant in this mode. Even though you don't have a health bar, when you spin up against another player, it will knock them away and sometimes get rid of their item, which is incredibly useful considering how powerful the items are. Spinning will also get rid of most of your items if you have them, which allows you to potentially trade your current item up for a better one if you see it on the road. Perplexingly, in the main game, neither of these functionalities exist like they do in Top Ride. You can't just spin at somebody and immediately get rid of their power, nor can you lose your own power early by your own volition in the main game. Even though I love Top Ride, it's also clear to me that it was made as an appetizer for a much more extravagant main course. City Trial is the most forward-thinking, most innovative, and for most people, the most fun that you're going to have playing Kirby Air Ride. In City Trial, all players start out as the pathetically weak compact star. Different stars will fall around the map, and you're actually able to dismount and play as Kirby in this mode. Kirby is incredibly limited, and you're meant to just jump onto your next star, but it is a fun touch that Air Ride doesn't have. And it's a useful feature that makes the HP bars relevant, as during the entire City Trial, you'll be subject to different stage hazards and the attacks of other players. In fact, there's even a good few unique power-ups to City Trial that are far stronger than anything you'll find in the Air Ride section. While you run around the city, you'll be able to get permanent power-ups such as top speed increases, glide increases, weight increases, all of which hopefully make you more capable for the challenge that awaits you when the timer hits 0. You see, the city part of City Trial is actually just a warm-up, as after it concludes, you and the other players will be locked into a randomly selected challenge. So the goal of City Trial is just to win that challenge. And once it's over, you're back to the main menu. If you've ever played a roguelite or a MOBA, this is kind of like mashing the two ideas together long before either were popular. It begins with a phase of calm exploration where all the players are generally going for upgrades and sometimes messing with each other. Then the real challenge kicks in and all of that is eschewed, until a victor is decided, and then it's over. It's a short 10-minute excursion that's incredibly replayable. And get this, the challenge at the end of a City Trial run could also include a race with any of the Air Ride maps, which makes the actual Air Ride mode feel like a minigame because it's perfectly compartmentalized within the City Trial mode. In fact, City Trial is making better use of these stages because after you've collected enough bonuses, your star is often so incredibly fast that it's hard to control, making it a good thing that you can complete the race without actually touching the controller. These races at the end are only 1 lap long and are often just a formality, a victory lap, so to speak, as the winner was already decided by whoever got the best stats and best star in the actual city part of City Trial. And so it's totally okay that they don't feel super difficult to navigate. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. The city is fairly vast and expansive, with an underground layer and an overground layer. To make things simple and digestible, I'll try to divide it into a few major sections. The first is the center city location. This section connects to all the other areas, and it's also got the only place where you can get the traditional Kirby power-ups. This area sports an elevator platform, which, should you touch it, will put you on top of this building. Close by, you'll find some boost rings, which will help you fly into the top of this giant star-shaped building. The first time you touch it, it will break and become much smaller, dropping a bunch of stat boosters in the process. This and all the other destructible objects get reset every time you want to play again. If you go underground in this middle city area, you'll be greeted with the garage. In free play, this is where all your unlocked stars just sit. But in the actual city trial mode, it's just an area that adds to the size of the map and will connect to a few other areas we'll talk about later. Speaking of other areas, there's a rail line that runs along the perimeter of the map. Riding along these rails will get you to other locations quickly, and it just so happens that every rail station has a name and it coincides with a different area. Starting with the green canvas, this foresty area is home to the first boss of most of the Kirby games. Wispy Woods as he's called, and you can run into him to make him cry. He's not evil in this one, you can just do that. You can also destroy all the trees by running through them, or jump into them if you're just playing as Kirby. It's a little bit of fun. There are 2 pits that you can open up which lead to an underground section where you'll see a model of the entire city. Cute. Once in the underground area, you can use an elevator platform to get back up, or choose between 2 paths, both of which will just lead back to the garage. But you have to bust through a wall to get in, which is aided by these boost platforms. It is possible to break through the wall from the garage side, but it's a little easier this way. Moving away from the more foresty part, there's also a golf area where you can jump into these 2 golf holes and they'll spit you out up into the air, as well as a river with a strong current that will lead you up into a water wheel that takes you to an elevated section. The collision for the water wheel only works if you are on a star, so you can actually jump behind it as Kirby and send stars behind it if you just dismount them while in the water. Which is something I really liked as a kid, but now realize is probably a glitch that makes the game feel a little undercooked. Taking the railway counterclockwise will lead you to the Electric Lounge, which is an area with 4 layers that all have elevator platforms that shoot you up to the next one. You can go through these layers from the bottom, but you'll have to find a hole in order to go down a layer. There is a small rail that sends you straight up to the 2nd level, and all the levels above the first have boost panels that will shoot you out into the sky if you decide that you want to leave. Should you fly this way, you'll be flying over a ton of rock houses that are all destructible and get easier to destroy depending on your machine and stats. Moving on to the wharf, this area simply consists of the beach between the Electric Lounge, the wharf, and our next area, the castle. There are some whirlpools here that are interactable and some coral trees that you can smash, but it's not that interesting compared to most of the others. The castle is perhaps the most bare bones. I suppose you could give it credit for the coral trees, but that's about it. This small walled off area can open up during an event, and it will release a ton of the same item or stat booster. But other than that, it's just interesting geometry to climb on as Kirby in free play. There's also a hidden flower on it. What a cute touch. The final, and perhaps the most interesting location, is the Heat Top, which I will just be referring to as the volcano area. The volcano area boasts, of course, a volcano, and if you go into the center of the volcano, then you'll be shot all the way up to Sky Pillar, which is a small floating platform at the top of the map that's very fun to glide down from and sometimes has items and stars. It's also got these arrows painted on the side that literally beg you to try and climb it as Kirby, and would you look at that, you can. The volcano has destructible rocks around it, and it also has destructible passageways. Interestingly, one passageway will be chosen at random to lead into the volcano, and the other 2 will just give you some stat boosters or stat lower or power downs. There's also these jumping fiery dragons that will deal a ton of damage if you get hit by them. The interior of the volcano also reconnects to the garage area via a secret passageway. This secret passageway is actually rather important, as you might have seen the footage earlier where I show a piece of the Hydra in it, which I'll explain in a little bit. Also, the massive elevator platform simply has the same effect as jumping into the volcano, taking you straight to Sky Pillar. And lastly, there's an alternate route to the interior of the volcano by using the railway next to the rail station. There's also a little rocky outcrop that most people probably wouldn't be aware is part of the map. Not a lot ever goes on up here, but sometimes a box can spawn. That's about it. And as far as laying out the map goes, I've covered almost everything. I hope you can already see that a lot of love has been put into the creation of this map. And every single time you play City Trial, you're going to experience the difference that love and care makes firsthand. Especially because, unlike the Air Ride and Top Ride modes, the checklist of achievements that you can complete is way more fun to complete, recomplete, or even speedrun. And it's not because the achievements are any cooler or more creative, though sometimes they are, it's because you can complete a significant chunk of them in a single City Trial run. To use some examples as a point of comparison, in the Air Ride mode, if you complete a lap on Fantasy Meadows under a certain amount of time, then you'll get an achievement. If you complete a lap within a certain amount of time in Time Attack mode, you get an achievement. If you complete a lap within a certain amount of time in Free Run mode, you get an achievement. Meanwhile, City Trials achievements are like, make your way to the garden in the sky. In one game, get 10 or more top speed patches. I guess that the stat boosters are officially called patches. Bust the wheelie scooter while riding the compact star. Get the bomb ability from the copy chance wheel. Open the pitfall in the forest. Notice a pattern? Like half of the achievements can be completed in this same game if you actually know what you're going for, and if you had more than 7 minutes. Now, the ability to get achievements faster isn't inherently better, but City Trials achievements are much more subject to both the player's skill and luck. Air Ride and Top Ride are much more contingent on the player just entering a race with specific settings. Neither of these are universal truths, and City Trial has a ton of achievements that match what would be found in Air Ride and Top Ride, and Air Ride and Top Ride occasionally have achievements that match the unique ones that are more often found in City Trial, but City Trial's checklist is on the whole better than Air Ride or Top Rides. City Trial is at its best when you've got a couple achievements in mind that you're going for on that specific round, and when you're looking for your favorite star, and when you're trying to win whatever the challenge may be at the end. Sometimes you'll know, as there's a specific event which will trigger that just tells you what the challenge will be, or you can use the settings to set a specific challenge at the end, provided you've already unlocked it randomly. Well, I guess what I said was kind of a lie, because really City Trial is at its best when you're playing with friends, as it supports up to 4-player split screen. With modern emulation, it's not only possible to play with other people online, but there are also mods that nix the split screen element, allowing all players to exclusively see themselves during multiplayer. Though talking about mods and emulation exceeds the scope of this video, so I'm only going to mention that now, right alongside the fact that there's 2 modded versions of Kirby Air Ride called the Hack Pack and Backside, which I may use a little bit of footage from here and there since they're awesome and they allow me more specific control over random events. Speaking of events, every time you play City Trial, a decent amount of random events can occur at certain time intervals. The events can range greatly from full-scale apocalypses to, ironically, being rather uneventful. My favorite is the Dyna Blade event, where a giant chicken descends onto the city and will bestow anyone who is skilled enough to fly into her head with a stat booster, and she'll deal damage to anyone who touches other areas on her body before flying away and leaving behind more stat boosters. And if you deal enough damage before she leaves, you'll get a lot of stat boosters at the end. Another fun event is the Meteor Shower, which is absolutely insane and drops a ton of meteors that cause giant explosions, destroying a ton of the map and often killing players, but they also leave a bunch of stat boosters behind. And the last one I feel is worth mentioning is the giant UFO that you can get on top of to get a bunch of stat boosters, including the elusive All Up booster in the center. But there's tons of other random fun events, which I'll add some footage of here if I manage to capture them. The final aspect of the game that I've been mentioning all throughout the video but haven't actually explained yet are the boxes, perhaps because it's kind of obvious. They contain things. The blue ones have stat boosters and stat deboosters, the green ones have the unique and often very dangerous power-ups, while the red boxes contain the Kirby copy abilities. Now, there's only 3 colors, but there's actually a 4th kind of box, a special red box. These special boxes look identical to real ones but never despawn and remain unaffected by some events that may otherwise cause the boxes to bounce or spin. These special boxes always contain parts of the Dragoon or Hydra. If you played Smash Bros, you probably know where this is going. Collecting all 3 parts of the Dragoon or Hydra will replace your current star and transform it into a legendary air machine, causing the music and sky to change for the remainder of the trial. The Dragoon is the apex warp star when it comes to gliding. It can go insanely far and insanely fast in the air. And while it's not known for its offense or defense, it does have a considerable amount of health compared to the normal air machines, and it's probably the fastest one outside of the Hydra. The Hydra functions completely unique from any other star in the game. It does function a little bit similarly to the bulk star in the sense that it uses its charge as fuel, but you can't start driving at all unless your charge gauge is above 75%. If it goes lower than 75%, then stopping or braking at any time will cause you to need to go back up to 75% at least in order to continue moving. The Hydra is incredibly tough with a mountain of HP, defense, and offense, and it's also incredibly fast. Of course, it is severely handicapped by its charging mechanic, and it's not particularly good at gliding or turning, but it can get pretty far in a glide just based on its speed alone. Sometimes the parts for one of these will spawn, sometimes the parts for another will spawn, and sometimes the parts for both will spawn, but there are also times when neither spawn. And so trying to collect all the pieces can be a fun and enjoyable task, especially if you're playing with multiple humans who are fighting over them, as you'll lose a piece if you get smacked. I couldn't tell you exactly what their spawn rates are, but I'm guessing that they each spawn in about a quarter of the time. And despite being these awesome legendary air machines, they're not instant wins on all stages. In fact, the Hydra actually has quite a few stages where it's an instant loss because of the charge time. So I suppose it's an appropriate time to begin talking about the challenges that occur at the end of City Trial. Of course, I already mentioned that some of the challenges are just the races from the Air Ride mode, but other than that, there's a ton of unique flavor that this mode has to offer. Going from least exciting to most exciting, the drag races are a set of tracks that are mostly just a straightaway with some boost panels or spin boost panels and sometimes a small gliding section. These ones are often just decided by the player's top speed. If you're in the right star and you have the most speed, then you'll win, and if you don't, then sorry about it. Next on the list, I would say long jump and high jump are pretty interesting. They do have boost panels as well, so there is a little bit of skill, but once again, they're mostly decided by the player with the best stats and star. I'd say high jump gets a little bit more credit for this because it's sort of like you're ascending levels in an elevator with each level looking different, and you really want to know how high you can go, and also it doesn't take an ungodly amount of time like long jump can. I mean, come on man, you've already won. Next up are the Kirby Melee challenges. There are 2 different maps that this can take place on, and the goal is to kill the most NPCs. I like these a lot because your stats and star only matter as well as you can use them. There's not a big objective benefit to most stars or most stats, but if you have too many, then you can ride uncontrollably and miss a lot of the NPCs, and if you have too little, you're not at a huge disadvantage. There's also a decent amount of randomness, as some of the power-ups are very useful at netting kills and some of them are not, so it all depends on who can get to those power-ups first. And of course, what's better than killing NPCs? Killing actual players, of course, in the Destruction Derby challenge. The Destruction Derby is pretty self-explanatory. It's just a PvP mode where different copy abilities and power-ups will spawn so that you have an easier time killing each other. I always thought it was cool that some of the maps here actually use portions of the city for the Destruction Derby, which is something that none of the other stadium challenges actually do. Next up is one of my faves, the Target Flight Challenge. It's sort of like playing darts, except the dartboard is full of squares and they have random numbers on them, except one of the squares on the wall will always be the 100-point square, and it has a garage door that opens and closes, meaning that timing your jump properly is important, but you also want to be the first person because if somebody else gets it, then that square will disappear. This is the only game mode that has 2 rounds, and it actually cares about the results of both of them individually. Your combined score in both the rounds determines the winner. Lastly, we have the one that I feel is the most exciting, which is the Versus King Dedede challenge. This one is super cool. You all team up to fight King Dedede, and usually it goes poorly with everybody dead. Speaking of which, both King Dedede and Meta Knight are playable characters, but they're not playable in City Trial. You can only play them in the free play section, in which case it's a little pointless because there's nothing to do with them because they can't ride on stars like Kirby can. Ring it up, Air Ride dub, Air Ride makes better use of Dedede and Meta Knight, whatever, moving on. This boss fight versus King Dedede is usually really difficult because you're going to have a lot of speed boosts, and you're not going to want that on this small map where King Dedede is driving at 5 miles an hour. And woo, that's about all City Trial has to offer. But before we wrap up, it would be unfair of me not to give Air Ride at least a little credit for tying its achievements into different unlockable stars that you can use in the races. This element technically exists in City Trial, but it's only related to the free play mode where you can unlock the Dragoon, Hydra, Meta Knight, or Dedede. When playing the actual City Trial, the only difference between a new game and a 100% save file is that you can select more Kirby colors at the start, and the ability to choose any stadium challenge that will occur at the end, but that's not unlocked by the achievement checklist. You'll just automatically unlock them with no message after you've done them once before. And now that you know all that, I would ask you to rate what you think City Trial is like as an experience. For me, I would say it's a 9 out of 10. I do wish that there were more cities for you to trial through, or that the city would change a bit on different runs. But other than that, it's pretty much perfect, and it's hard for me to give it a lower rating considering how many hours I've sunk into it as a kid and how I still want to play it right now. Anyway, back to the point I was making. If City Trial is about an 8 or a 9, and Top Ride is about an 8 or a 9, is the game worse because it also has the Air Ride mode? And it's kind of a complicated question. On one hand, back when I was in college, I played Melee, and on the very first day, a comedically weird situation occurred. Some of the Smash 4 players were on a table behind us, and they were talking about Melee because presumably some of them saw us playing it, but one of the guys just didn't and was a total asshole. And so he went off about all the different ways that Melee sucks and about how Melee players suck and are assholes with egos. Meanwhile, me and another guy I just met were both playing it silently, like literally 10 feet away. But one of the points that he made and that all of his friends seemed to agree upon is that the cast was really unbalanced. And to that I thought, well, I'm playing Pichu right now. Pichu is supposed to be bad in Melee. Like, this wasn't an oversight, this was in the trophy description of Pichu. This is an intentional design choice. Pichu is supposed to be worse than everybody else in the game, and mostly accomplishes that. But let's roll with that and just say that it was an accident, and that Pichu shouldn't have actually been that bad. Is it a worse game because Pichu exists? Probably not. And expanding on that idea, why does the author's intent matter? Yeah, some characters are bad and some characters are good. Clearly the game is not better if you just deleted the bad characters, right? So yeah, obviously Kirby Air Ride is a 9 out of 10, and just because the actual Air Ride section kinda sucks, that doesn't really mean much. Awesome game, nothing more to talk about, right? Well, let's consider this from another perspective. Genshin Impact. Yeah, you probably didn't expect me to say that, did ya? In Genshin Impact, there's a standalone card game called Genius Invocation. Let's pretend that, for the sake of argument, this is the best card game known to man. Does Genshin Impact suddenly become a 10 out of 10 game? Maybe it would, but it's hard to say. I'm not sure there's really a right answer to this kind of thing. Ultimately, a reviewer score is supposed to encapsulate the totality of a game, right? So maybe it should consider all the factors. But if the average player is hardly going to spend any time in the Air Ride mode anyway, then how much should it really factor into the review score? Hard to say. It's very easy for me to look back and see these review scores and think, man, Kirby Air Ride got robbed. It deserved to be so much more. We should have sequels. It should have sold millions more copies, but if I was a reviewer back then, I'm not sure I would have done any better. Glad I'm not them, I guess. Fuck yeah, 10 out of 10. Best game ever.